The words landed like a slap across the room. Karoline Leavitt leaned into her microphone, eyes flashing, and with a sharp edge in her voice, hurled the line that generations of immigrants have heard in whispers. In sneers, in taunts, "Go back if you don't like it here." The air froze. For a split second, time itself seemed to hold its breath. The chatter stopped, pens hovered above notepads, and the cameras locked in. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed louder against the sudden silence. Every eye darted toward Kash Patel. He didn't move. His face remained unreadable, as though carved from stone, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a flinch. The insult hung in the air like smoke, heavy, undeniable. Around the room, a few muffled gasps broke through, followed by the awkward shuffle of people who knew exactly what had just been said and what it meant. Because this wasn't just a political jab. It was the oldest weapon of exclusion, sharpened and repackaged for the moment. The suggestion that someone who looks different, someone whose roots trace to another land, can never truly belong here. It was meant to sting, to humiliate, to reduce him to an outsider in the very nation he had served. But Kash Patel didn't bite. His eyes remained steady, his posture calm. That composure itself was unsettling, as if he were silently reminding everyone, "I've heard worse, and I am still here." The silence stretched, thick with anticipation. Somewhere in the back, a staffer cleared their throat nervously. The cameras kept rolling, hungry for what would come next. Viewers at home could already sense this was the kind of moment that would not just disappear into the noise. This was the spark before a fire. Leavitt smirked, mistaking the calm for weakness, unaware that she had just set the stage for her own undoing. Because Kash Patel wasn't about to lash out. He wasn't about to shout back. He was about to do something far more devastating. What Kash Patel said next wasn't just a reply. It became a moment that millions would never forget. Asterisk Karoline. Leavitt was no stranger to confrontation, barely out of her 20s. She had built her reputation not on careful policy or quiet persuasion, but on the shock value of her words. She wore her combativeness like a badge of honor, stepping into interviews and debates with the confidence of someone who knew that outrage was its own kind of currency. Every soundbite was designed to go viral. Every insult, carefully sharpened to feed her brand as a rising MAGA firebrand. For her supporters, she was bold, unfiltered, unapologetic. For her critics, she was reckless, inflammatory, and dangerous. It was this combustible persona that exploded in that hearing room. When Leavitt barked, "Go back," it wasn't just another cutting remark from a politician hungry for attention. It was a weapon aimed directly at the foundation of who belongs in America. Because those two words, wrapped in disdain, carry the weight of centuries. They echo back to factory floors where immigrants were told they didn't belong, to schoolyards where children with accents were mocked, to neighborhoods where families were harassed for flying the wrong flag or cooking the wrong food. In that moment, Leavitt wasn't just sparring with Kash Patel. She was summoning one of the oldest, ugliest ghosts in the American story, the idea that Americanness has a single face, a single color, a single origin. And for millions watching, that made the insult larger than her, larger than Patel. It was about every person who has ever been told their roots disqualify their patriotism. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Patel wasn't just another panelist being heckled. He was a son of immigrants, a man who had climbed the rungs of public service, who had chosen to dedicate his life to defending the very country that people like Leavitt claimed to guard. To tell him to go back wasn't just offensive, it was absurd. But absurdity has never stopped such attacks from cutting deep. And yet, that's what made this clash more than an exchange of words. It was a test of something bigger. What does it mean to be American? Who gets to claim it? Who has the authority to decide who belongs and who doesn't? For Leavitt, the answer was clear. Americanness was conditional, fragile, something that could be stripped away with a sneer if you didn't fit her mold. For Patel, the answer was radically different. It was rooted in service, in sacrifice, in an understanding that this country isn't defined by exclusion, but by the endless struggle to expand who we includes. The room may have been silent, but the stakes were roaring. This wasn't about two politicians trading blossom. was about whose vision of America would prevail: Leavitt's narrow, hostile version, or Patel's broader, inclusive one. And what made it even more electrifying was this: Patel wasn't just any target. He had lived the struggle. He had heard those words before in classrooms, in streets, in whispers behind his back. And each time he had chosen not to break, but to rise. He knew exactly what was at stake, and he was ready. To understand why his answer cut so deep, you have to know the man behind the calm to understand the force of the insult hurled that day. You have to step back into the world of Karoline Leavitt, the rising starlet of MAGA politics, who has built her career not on bridge building, while on torch throwing. At just 27, she was already a headline generator, a figure who knew that in today's political climate, attention is the most valuable currency. And Karoline craved it. Her ascent wasn't built on policy white papers or bipartisan coalitions. It was built on viral confrontations, fiery speeches, and an unapologetic loyalty to Donald Trump. She made her name as a press aide in his White House, sharpening her teeth on sound bites that slammed Democrats, mocked journalists, and fired up the conservative base. For her, every microphone was a stage, every panel a battlefield. She didn't just debate, she declared war. Her speeches carried a certain cadence, fiery, brash, and punctuated with the kinds of lines that sent her followers roaring. "We are the real patriots," she would thunder, as though patriotism were a private club to which only she held the keys. She mocked opponents with a smirk, dismissed nuance with a wave of her hand, and reveled in the outrage she sparked online. Clips of her confrontations spread across X and TikTok like wildfire, sometimes praised as bold truth-telling, sometimes condemned as pure cruelty. Either way, they kept her in the spotlight, and that was all that mattered. But behind the spectacle lay contradictions that couldn't be ignored. She wrapped herself in the flag, declaring herself the defender of American values, yet wielded her words like weapons against Americans who didn't fit her narrow vision. She preached unity under Trump's banner while deepening divides with every insult. She talked about loving America, but her love often came with conditions. Look like me, sound like me, believe like me. Her combative style was no accident. It was strategy. Karoline knew that in the ecosystem of right-wing politics, nothing fueled donations and clicks like a viral fight. Every insult was an audition for greater power. Every provocation a way to show she could go toe-to with anyone. She was quick to mock, quick to dismiss, quick to turn complex debates into sharp-edged zingers that made her audience cheer but left her opponents stunned. And in many ways, it worked. She became a darling of conservative media, a frequent guest on talk shows, and a fiery speaker at rallies where her sound bites echoed across packed arenas. Her name climbed through political circles as a future face of the movement. New generation eager to outdo its predecessors in aggression and loyalty. But this strategy carried a hidden flaw. Spectacle thrives on control. You dictate the pace, you throw the punches, you choose when to smirk and when to sneer. Yet the moment that control slips, the entire performance risks collapsing. And on that day, in that hearing room, Karoline's reliance on spectacle became her undoing. When she snapped, "Go back if you don't like it here," she thought she was landing another viral moment. She imagined headlines celebrating her boldness, her refusal to be silenced. She expected Patel to sputter, to react with anger, to give her the confrontation she craved. That's how these spectacles usually went. The firebrand seizes control. The opponent stumbles, and the crowd laughs along. But what she didn't count on was silence. She didn't count on Patel's unshakable calm, on his refusal to play the role she scripted for him. She didn't count on the room recoiling, not at Patel, but at her. In a single instant, the stage she thought she commanded turned against her. The smirk that had always signaled her dominance now looked like desperation, like arrogance stripped bare. Because arrogance has a fatal flaw. It cannot recognize quiet strength until it's too late. It thrives on noise, on chaos, on sparring matches where volume wins. But when met with calm, when faced with dignity that refuses to bend, arrogance stumbles. And that is exactly what happened. Karoline Leavitt thrived on spectacle, but this time, the spectacle belonged to someone else. But arrogance always underestimates quiet strength. and Kash Patel had plenty. Before Kash Patel ever walked into that room, before cameras captured his measured silence in the face of insult, his story had already been written in the long shadows of sacrifice and struggle. He wasn't born into privilege. He didn't inherit a political dynasty or glide into Washington on the back of family wealth. His path began in the modest neighborhoods of New York. The son of Indian immigrants who came to America chasing the promise that this country, despite its flaws, could still offer opportunity to those willing to work for it. From an early age, Kash understood what it meant to stand out. His skin, his name. His family's traditions, they marked him as different in classrooms where difference was often ridiculed. The taunts were familiar. Questions about where he was really from. Jokes about his lunch. The insinuation that no matter how perfectly he spoke English, he didn't quite belong. Those words, spoken by children, echoed the same poison that would later come from politicians, just delivered with less polish. But Kash's parents didn't raise him to wilt under prejudice. They raised him to rise. They worked long hours, his father in manufacturing, his mother in education, instilling in him the values of persistence, humility, and service. They believed that America's promise wasn't reserved for a few. It was built on the idea that their son could carve out a place if he was willing to give more than he took. He carried those lessons into his education, earning degrees in law and carving a path into public service. While others chased profit, Kash chased purpose. He stepped into the grueling world of national security and counterterrorism, where his sharp mind and steady demeanor set him apart. In intelligence briefings and high-stakes negotiations, he was never the loudest voice in the room, but often the most trusted. His calm wasn't passivity. It was power. Over the years, he rose to senior positions inside the Department of Justice and the National Security Council. He advised military leaders, wrestled with threats to the homeland, and worked to protect the country he'd been told, time and again, that he didn't belong to. For Kash, service was the ultimate rebuttal. Every late-night drafting reports, every classified briefing, every decision made in the pressure cooker of Washington was a quiet reminder, I am as American as anyone. My work speaks louder than your prejudice. And yet, no matter how high he climbed, the whispers never fully disappeared. Even in the corridors of power, he encountered the same poisonous question. Where do you really belong? Colleagues who treated him as an outsider, reporters who cast doubt on his loyalty, critics who hinted that his heritage disqualified his patriotism. Each barb was another scar, but rather than weaken him, they hardened his resolve. That lived experience, the resilience born from being underestimated. The strength forged in exclusion became the armor Kash carried into every room. It made him immune to the easy traps of rage or defensiveness. He knew that those who tell others to go back thrive on reaction, on proving their target rattled. Kash denied them that satisfaction every time. He had learned the quiet strength of holding his ground without raising his voice. It is this composure, this discipline, that made him the antithesis of Karoline Leavitt. Where she thrived on spectacle, he thrived on service. Where she relied on volume, he relied on substance. Where she saw patriotism as a club, he lived it as duty. His calm intelligence was not only a personal trait, it was a philosophy of leadership. To lead was to listen, to weigh, to respond not with fire but with clarity. And in that hearing room, those qualities defined the stakes. Leavitt's words were meant to trigger him, to draw him into the mud where she was most comfortable. But Kash Patel was not the boy in the classroom anymore, not the young staffer dismissed in corridors of power. He was a man whose entire career testified to his loyalty to America. He was a man whose scars had become his strength. He sat in that chair as the embodiment of something larger than himself, as the countless Americans whose families came from somewhere else, who had been told at one point or another that they didn't belong, but who proved their Americanness not through words but through contribution. In him, millions saw a reflection of their own parents, their own journeys, their own battles for dignity. This is why his silence after Leavitt's insult wasn't weakness. It was mastery. He had lived through too much to waste energy on outrage. He had learned that the most devastating response is not fury, but calm. That lesson, born of a lifetime of resilience, prepared him for the moment that would soon unfold. So when Karoline barked her insult, Kash didn't flinch. He chose his moment. The air in the hearing room had not yet settled from the sting of Karoline Leavitt's words when she leaned forward again, her voice growing sharper, hungrier for a reaction. She repeated herself, louder this time, as though the volume could give her insult more legitimacy. "If you don't like it here, why don't you go back?" Her eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, for smirks, for nods of approval that would validate her outburst. But the approval didn't come. Instead, there was an uneasy quiet, broken only by the shuffle of papers and the scratch of a pen nervously tapping against a notebook. The camera zoomed closer, sensing the drama thickening. The moment wasn't passing, it was building. Kash Patel remained still, hands folded neatly before him, his posture upright, his eyes steady and locked, not on Karoline, but on the panel itself, as though he refused to lower himself to her level. That calm presence only seemed to inflame her further. His silence, his refusal to react, was more devastating than any immediate rebuttal. So she pressed again. Her voice, now dripping with mockery, tried to fill the void his calm had left. "People like you are always complaining, always tearing this country down. If you don't respect it, then maybe you don't deserve to be here." The words rang hollow, but their venom was undeniable. Some in the audience shifted in their seats, discomfort plain on their faces. Others leaned forward, sensing that something historic was about to happen. The tension was no longer just between Karoline and Kash. It had gripped everyone in the room. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Her face flushed, her voice cracking from force, her movements sharp and frantic. And across from her sat Patel, measured, composed, unshaken, as if carved from the very ideals she claimed to defend. The more she raged, the more he seemed to grow in stature. The imbalance was striking, arrogance flailing against dignity, fury colliding with silence. It was theater, yes, but it was also truth unfolding in real time. Commentators would later say that in those moments, Karoline was fighting not just Patel, but her own desperation to hold control. The louder she shouted, the more control she lost. And Patel, by saying nothing yet, was taking command without lifting a finger. The audience knew it. You could see it in the way their eyes shifted toward him, waiting, almost pleading for him to respond. Every second stretched into eternity. Each breath held by the crowd was another ounce of pressure pressing down on Leavitt. Another brick laid in the stage Patel was about to step onto. Even Karoline seemed to sense it, though she didn't understand it. She leaned back, then forward again, her tone swinging between aggression and defensiveness, trying to cover the cracks forming in her performance. "Say something," her expression seemed to scream, "fight back. Prove me right." But Patel didn't give her the satisfaction, because Patel wasn't just playing for the room. He was playing for history. He knew that sometimes the most devastating words are the ones delivered after silence has stretched long enough for everyone to lean in. He understood that the power of a moment lies not in who shouts the loudest, but in who controls the rhythm of the room. And in that chamber, rhythm now belonged to him. The cameras were trained on his face. The audience was hanging on his composure. Even Karoline's allies had fallen silent, unsure whether to cheer or retreat. The stage was his, and he hadn't even opened his mouth. The escalation had reached its peak. Fury had exhausted itself. The arrogance had shouted itself hoarse. All that remained was the calm before the storm that Kash Patel himself was about to unleash. And then, in 10 quiet seconds, Patel turned the insult into a national lesson. The silence that followed Karoline Leavitt's rant was suffocating. Her words still lingered in the air, but their sharpness had dulled into something brittle, something that could shatter with just a touch. Kash Patel sat unmoving, his composure unbroken, his hands still folded in front of him. For a moment, it felt as if time itself had slowed. The entire room caught between the noise of what had just been said and the anticipation, what would come next. Patel finally looked up. Not quickly, not with anger, but with a deliberate stillness that drew every eye back to him. The pause was his weapon, and he wielded it with precision. Cameras zoomed in on his face. His eyes were calm, steady, not a hint of rage, not a trace of panic. He inhaled slowly, then let the silence stretch further. People leaned in. A cough echoed from the back of the room, followed by the squeak of a chair. Even Karoline herself, who had been buzzing with bravado moments earlier, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Then Patel spoke. His voice was measured, deliberate, a kind of tone that cut sharper than a scream because it carried the full weight of conviction. I was born here. The words were simple, almost gentle, but they landed like a thunderclap. A ripple moved through the audience, an audible gasp, a shuffle of papers, someone whispering, "Oh God." Under their breath, Karoline's smirk faltered, the color draining slightly from her cheeks. Patel didn't stop. His delivery was precise, every syllable carved in stone. I served this country. I've spent my life defending its values, its people, its flag. So maybe the real question isn't where I should go. Another pause. This time, heavier. He looked directly at her now, not with anger, but with the kind of clarity that strips away every mask, every performance. But whether you understand what America even means, the room froze. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the chamber. The words hung there, echoing in the silence, a perfect counterpunch to her attack. No shouting, no theatrics, just truth laid bare. Karoline blinked rapidly, her mouth opening slightly as though to reply, but nothing came out. The cameras captured everything, the awkward shuffle in her chair, the nervous glance toward her allies, the thin smile she tried to force back onto her lips. But the damage was already done. She wasn't in control anymore. She had been stripped of it completely, irreversibly, by 10 seconds of calm truth. Around the panel, heads turned. One senator leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised in disbelief. Another covered her mouth with her hand, as if to stifle the gasp that had already escaped. The audience began to murmur, the sound building like a wave before it hushed again under the gravity of the moment. Patel let the silence return. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply sat back, his hands still folded, his eyes forward, as though he had just said the most ordinary thing in the world. That composure only made it more devastating. For Karoline, the collapse was public and painful. She had built her brand on fire, on volume, on spectacle. But in this moment, the cameras weren't on her fury. They were on her fragility. Patel hadn't just countered her insult. He had reframed the entire debate. He wasn't the outsider she had tried to paint him as. He was the embodiment of the American story, and she was the one exposed as small, shallow, and insecure. And the world noticed. Within seconds, clips of Patel's reply began spreading online. First, a short clip on Twitter, captioned simply, "This is how you do it." Then a TikTok edit with dramatic music. Patel's calm words overlaid with subtitles that emphasized every beat. "I was born here. I served this country. Do you even know what America means?" YouTube channels grabbed the footage and uploaded it under titles like, "Patel destroys Karoline Leavitt in 10 seconds flat." The reaction was electric. One commentator tweeted, "This wasn't just a clapback. This was a masterclass in composure." Another wrote, "Privilege just got checked by patriotism." Memes began pouring in side by side. Screenshots of Karoline's flustered face and Patel's calm stare, captioned with lines like, "When arrogance meets truth." News networks picked it up too. The clip ran on evening broadcasts, dissected frame by frame. Analysts called it a turning point in political rhetoric, pointing out that Patel hadn't just defended himself, he had redefined the conversation about belonging and identity in America, and for everyday people watching at home. The moment resonated deeply. Immigrants saw their own struggles validated. Veterans felt pride in his reminder of service and sacrifice. Young people shared it as a lesson in how to respond to hate without lowering yourself to its level. Karoline had come to that hearing expecting to dominate, to leave with another viral clip of her own fiery performance. Instead, she had become the cautionary tale, the politician undone by her own arrogance, exposed by the very man she tried to belittle. Patel, on the other hand, had walked into the room as just another witness, but he left it as something more, a symbol of resilience, of dignity. of what it means to belong in America. The beauty of his reply wasn't just in the words themselves. It was in the way he delivered them. The silence before, the precision of the phrasing, the refusal to let anger hijack the moment. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a statement of principle etched into the memory of everyone who watched. The contrast could not have been sharper. Karoline's rage had burned hot and fast, leaving only smoke. Patel's calm burned slow and steady, leaving a flame that would not be forgotten. As the hearing continued, Karoline tried to recover, but every word she spoke afterward sounded smaller, weaker, stripped of the force she once carried. Patel, meanwhile, didn't need to say anything more. His 10 seconds had already done the work of a lifetime, and as the gavel eventually came down, ending the session, there was no question about what people would remember. Not Karoline's yelling, not her insults, but the quiet, devastating reply of the man who turned her attack into a national lesson. It was the moment the entire hearing shifted from politics into something larger. It wasn't just about two people sparring. It was about what America is and who gets to define it. And Patel had answered not just for himself, but for millions. But the real explosion wasn't in the room. It was in the aftermath that shook the country. Asterisk. The hearing may have adjourned, but the battle had only just begun. Outside the chamber, the world erupted. Within minutes, Patel's words, calm, deliberate, unforgettable, were everywhere. Twitter lit up first. The phrase, "Do you even know what America means?" exploding across feeds with lightning speed. The hashtag This Is America trended within the hour. Alongside hashtag Patel mic drop. Memes poured in, crafted with the speed only the internet can deliver. Patel's steady face frozen mid-sentence, overlaid with captions, "Strength isn't volume. It's conviction." A split screen. Karoline's sneer on one side, Patel's calm gaze on the other, with the words, "Guess who looks more American now?" TikTok stitched his 10-second takedown into 1,000 different edits, slow-motion, dramatic music. Even cinematic. Black and white versions replaying the moment like a scene out of a Hollywood drama. But it wasn't just the online echo chamber. High-profile figures weighed in. A retired general tweeted, "That's how you defend your country with dignity, not rage." A best-selling author called the moment an immigrant son's reminder of America's promise. Celebrities shared clips on Instagram, adding captions like, "This is what leadership looks like." Asterisk news anchors replayed the exchange over and over, dissecting every pause, every expression. On one channel, conservative commentator tried to downplay Patel's words as overly dramatic, but even she was drowned out by co-panelists who insisted, no, that was a defining moment. He turned the insult into a mirror of truth. Cable news montages captured the scope of it all. One anchor declared, "Karoline Leavitt picked a fight, and she lost it on national television." Another put it bluntly, "Patel showed America what composure under fire really looks like." Asterisk and ordinary Americans joined the chorus. Veterans posted videos of themselves saluting Patel's clip. Immigrant families stitched together heartfelt TikToks saying, "We've heard those words too, go back, but Patel showed us how to stand taller." Teachers used the moment in civics classes, replaying it to students as a real-world example of resilience and belonging. Asterisk for Karoline Leavitt. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Reporters chased her down hallways, pressing for a response. She stumbled through defensive answers, insisting her words had been taken out of context. But the footage was clear. The smirk, the snap, the venom, there was no hiding from it. Her attempts at spin only made her look smaller, more desperate. While Patel's reply continued to grow in stature with every retweet, every broadcast replay, every late-night monologue. Asterisk, because this wasn't just politics. This was personal. Millions of people had felt those same words go back, used as a weapon against them or their families. And in Patel's quiet answer, they found validation. They saw their dignity defended. His words became more than a rebuttal. They became a rallying cry. Asterisk political analysts scrambled to explain it. Some said Patel had tapped into the emotional core of Americanists, the idea that service, Sacrifice and citizenship outweigh skin color, last names, or heritage. Others saw it as a cultural reckoning, a reminder that exclusionary rhetoric no longer went unchallenged. One headline read, "Patel redefines patriotism in 10 seconds." Another, "A viral lesson in belonging." Meanwhile, Karoline's allies went conspicuously quiet. The usual defenders, quick to leap into the fray, offered little more than silence or tepid half-statements. The spectacle she had hoped to command had flipped against her. Leaving her isolated, Patel, by contrast, didn't need to add anything. He released no follow-up statement, gave no victory lap interviews. His silence off stage only deepened the impact. The clip was his statement. The people had already made it immortal, and so the shockwaves spread through homes, classrooms, newsrooms, and social feeds. The message was clear: dignity had triumphed over cruelty, and yet beyond the noise. Patel's answer carried something deeper, a timeless reminder. Asterisk when the storm of commentary. Memes and headlines began to quiet. What lingered was not the insulted, was Patel's answer. His words had transformed a crude attack into something far greater, universal truth about what it means to belong to America. Because at its core, his reply wasn't just about him. It was about every child who ever felt the sting of being told they didn't belong. Every family that sacrificed everything to build a life in this country. Every veteran who put on the uniform, no matter where their parents were born, because they believed in the ideals of the nation they served. Patel's calm declaration was their voice too. He had reframed the oldest wound into a timeless principle. America is not defined by ancestry, but by contribution. Not by bloodline, but by service. Not by who your parents were, but by what you choose to give back. And that is why his words resonated. Because dignity is louder than hate. Service is stronger than sneers. And truth always survives. The contrast was stark. Karoline Leavitt's voice had been built on division, on stoking fear and exclusion. But Patel's voice? It was built on lived experience, on sacrifice, on the quiet strength that comes from walking through fire and refusing to be broken. And in that clash, America was reminded of its best self. For generations. Waves of immigrants and their children have faced the same taunt. Go back. Yet again and again. They answered, not with rage, but with proof. Proof in the factories they worked, the businesses they built, the communities they raised, the uniforms they wore in battle. Proof that belonging is not granted by permission of the loudest critic, but earned in the daily acts of contribution. Patel had taken that insult and turned it into a mirror. And in that mirror, the country was forced to ask itself, who really represents the American spirit? The one who mocks, or the one who serves? The answer was undeniable, and as the echo of that moment spread, carried a lesson that transcended politics, transcended partisanship. A lesson about resilience, about identity, about the promise that America makes not just to those born here, but to all who give of themselves to it, because arrogance will always crumble under the weight of dignity. Hatred will always fracture in the face of truth, and every attempt to divide will, sooner or later, be undone by the quiet power of unity. That is why Patel's words became more than a viral clip. They became a moral compass, a reminder of who we are at our best, and who we must choose to be moving forward. Which brings us back to the lesson we must carry forward. Asterisk Karoline Leavitt came into that hearing ready to land a blow. She tried to humiliate Kash Patel with the oldest, ugliest insult in the book, but instead of breaking him, she exposed herself. Because Patel's calm reply didn't just meet her attack, it demolished it. With a single devastating reminder of what America truly means, turned her cruelty into his victory. That's why this moment matters. It's not about who shouted loudest. It's about who carried themselves with dignity. It's about who embodied the promise of this country. And Patel showed the nation that composure, truth, and service will always eclipse arrogance and hate. So here's the takeaway. When faced with sneers and slurs, dignity can be the loudest answer of all. Patel didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to match her rage. He simply let truth do the talking, and the entire country listened. If you believe dignity speaks louder than hate, share this story. Let it ripple across timelines, across dinner tables, across classrooms. Because these are the moments that remind us who we are. And if you stand with voices who refuse to be silenced, hit that subscribe button. Join a community that believes in justice, in belonging, and in the strength of truth over noise. The cameras caught it all. Patel rising, steady, as Karoline sat rattled, her smirk gone, her words hollow. And as he walked away, the room knew what millions would soon feel the villain had lost. Indignity had won. Because in the end, it's not the insult that history remembers. It's the reply that rises above it, asterisk.